Hi everyone, and welcome to Emma's IB Biology Review. Today we are going to be covering the topic of ecology, which falls under categories C and 4. Specifically, we will be learning about 4.1 and C.1, species and communities, C.2, communities and ecosystems, C.3, impacts of humans on ecosystems, and C.4, conservation of biodiversity. We will be discussing key terms such as ecology, ecosystem, community, keystone species, food web, biomagnification, mutualism, commensalism, fundamental and realized niche, alien species, and competitive exclusion principle, amongst many other things. By the end of this video, you should be able to understand the following essential ideas of the topic of ecology. Basic principles of ecology, community structure and ecosystems, food pyramid and food webs, alien and invasive species, biomagnification, types of conservation, and the identification of species based on methods of nutrition. With further ado, let's get started. To begin, we are going to learn about the basic principles of ecology. So, what is ecology? Well, ecology is the study of how organisms interact with one another and with their physical environment. Much of the interactions an organism has with its environment is dictated on what the organism needs and does to survive. Factors that dictate the survival of an organism are either abiotic or biotic factors. Biotic factors are those that are living, while abiotic factors are those that are not living. For instance, factors that dictate the survival of a plant are temperature, water, light availability, salinity, and pH levels, while factors that dictate the survival of an animal are temperature, territory, water, and food supply. Another name for these aforementioned factors are limiting factors. In correct terms, a limiting factor is a component of an ecosystem which limits the distribution of a population. Continuing onward, much of the basics of ecology are based on the living structures of organisms within their environment. So what are these so-called living structures? Well, a species is one of the living structures, and a species is a group of organisms that can potentially interbreed to produce fertile offspring. A population is a group of organisms that are living in the same area, while a community is formed by populations of different species together and interacting with each other. All of these structures accumulate into an ecosystem, which is perhaps one of the most important terms to know in biology and ecology. An ecosystem is a community and its abiotic environment. So remember, abiotic means not living, and this includes factors like sunlight and other nutrients. It is also important to recognize that each species plays a unique role within a community because of its habitat and interactions with other species. This job is often classified into a species ecological niche, which is a term used to describe the position and role of an organism in its environment. An ecological niche includes the physical and biological conditions of an organism's survival. There are two types of ecological niches. The first is a fundamental niche. A fundamental niche is an entire set of conditions under which a species can survive and reproduce. The second type is a realized niche, which is the environment that a species gets due to the various limiting factors it encounters. In other words, a fundamental niche is the ideal niche for an organism. It is essentially perfect, while a realized niche is the environment that the species is currently living in with inhibiting factors. The ways in which organisms acquire food also dictates the structure of an ecosystem, as it creates various interactions between different species. The ways in which organisms acquire food to survive is known as modes of nutrition. There are essentially two ways an organism can acquire energy: by being a heterotroph or an autotroph. An autotroph synthesizes its organic molecules from inorganic substances. In other words, an autotroph makes its own food, and within a food chain, an autotroph is known as a producer. Plants are autotrophs, and they obtain chemical energy through the process of photosynthesis. The second mode of nutrition is being a heterotroph. Heterotrophs obtain their energy from other organisms. There are three methods to obtain energy from other organisms. One is by being a consumer, which ingests organic matter which is living or recently killed. Consumers are classified into subcategories of herbivores, scavengers, or carnivores. The second way to obtain energy from other organisms is by being a detritivore. Detritivores ingest non-living organic matter. The most popular detritivore are earthworms. The last way to obtain energy from other organisms is by being a saprotroph. Saprotroph secretes enzymes and absorbs the products. Many bacteria and fungi are saprotrophs. As stated previously, the ways in which organisms acquire food results in various relationships. These relationships are classified into a food chain or a food web. A food web is the network of many food chains, while a food chain is the linear feeding of organisms linked together to acquire energy. The diagram below is a food web and shows the various feeding relationships of organisms within an ecosystem. For instance, the marsh grass is the primary producer of the food web. The frog can be classified as a secondary and tertiary consumer. An example of a food chain within this food web is from the marsh grass to the deer to the lion. Interactions between organisms can also be classified based on the type of relationship. Predation is a type of relationship where one organism hunts and feeds on another organism. This establishes a predator-prey relationship and can be seen in the relationship between a lion and a gazelle. Mutualism is a type of relationship where both species benefit from the interaction, while parasitism is where only one species benefits to the detriment of the other. One such example of parasitism is leeches that attach to an organism's skin and prevent blood clotting from occurring. Commensalism is where one species benefits but the other is unaffected. Finally, herbivory is the act of eating only plant matter. Based on these relationships, there exist keystone species, which are species that have a large impact on the environment relative to its abundance. Therefore, slight changes in the numbers of a keystone species could prove to be detrimental to other populations of species within the specified ecosystem. One such example of a keystone species is in the Pacific Northwest, where sea otter populations control the population of sea urchins. Another key concept of ecology is the impact of humans. Various human activities impact how an ecosystem functions, specifically through alien and invasive species. Alien species are those that have been transferred from their natural habitat to a new environment. An invasive species is one which may cause environmental damage within food chains and the biodiversity of an ecosystem. Alien species are often introduced into an ecosystem by humans. For instance, the cane toad in Australia was introduced to the ecosystem to control sugarcane pests. However, due to its poisonous skin and lack of any predators, the cane toad is now an invasive species, affecting the populations of other species within that ecosystem. The concept of the negative impact of an invasive species certifies the competitive exclusion principle, which states that two species cannot occupy an identical niche within a community. One species will have a competitive advantage and survive at the expense of the other. Human impact within an environment can also be seen with the use of chemicals. Biomagnification is the process in which chemical substances become more concentrated at each trophic level of a food and energy pyramid. Essentially, pollutants become concentrated in the tissues of organisms at higher trophic levels because these organisms are consuming more to get more energy. Higher order consumers will experience more contamination from a chemical. One such example of a biomagnification is within the chemical DDT. DDT was once used to control malaria-carrying mosquitoes. However, long-term effects have shown that DDT has reduced the population of higher-order consumers. Conservation efforts are in place globally in an attempt to reverse the negative effects that humans have implemented into ecosystems. Ultimately, entire communities need to be conserved in order to preserve biodiversity. Biodiversity and how it is impacted through various conditions can be observed with an indicator species. An indicator species is an organism used to assess a specific environmental condition. Their population growth or reduction essentially indicates a change in the environment that may harm the biodiversity of an ecosystem. Examples of indicator species are mosses and mayfly larvae. Global conservation efforts can be seen within in situ conservation and ex situ conservation. In situ conservation is the preservation of a plant or animal species within their natural habitat, while ex situ conservation is the preservation of a plant or animal species outside their natural habitat. Ultimately, these conservation efforts need to be taken seriously as they can protect different species from becoming endangered and potentially extinct.